Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to be doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder per format. This particular video will be for standard best of one. We'll cover all the other videos as much as possible per week, depending on the data that's available. For a quick programming note going forward, at least for the interim, I've been trying for the last couple of weeks to do Explorer best of 3 and Historic best of 3. There just hasn't been a large population of data to get a real good sample size and have its own dedicated videos. So what I'm going to start doing is with those videos for Explorer and Historic, they're just going to be combined best of 1 and best of 3 formats each week until we get a large enough sample population that I can do standalone videos. So I want to convey the data every week as much as it's available. Some of it will come from Untapped, some I'm probably going to have to curate from other sources, but it just seems like the best of 3 formats for those Explorer and Historic just aren't as popular, or just the volume of games. That, or just people are playing a variety of decks that there's not enough to aggregate to give us some stats, because you usually need at least 100 matches out of a particular deck for it to register for Untapped. Speaking of Untapped, what you see on the screen, it's a companion tool that runs alongside Arena, tracks win rates, loss rates, deck collections, whole bunch of cool, useful stuff. Link is in the video description if you want to get started with a whole bunch of the functionality for free. And I will paste all these deck lists, as always, into the description so you can copy and paste them to your heart's content. So we'll jump into this, but just a quick thing. I'm like 50 subs away on YouTube from 7K. Hoping to get that as quick as possible. My goal is to hit 10,000 subs by June. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, it's free. It helps keep things going, helps the YouTube algorithm nonsense. And it's a click of a button and it goes a long way. Also lets you know whenever we go live with any of these, gameplay, tournament coverage, anything like that. So this is standard best of 1. We're looking January 1st through the 8th, Diamond to Mythic Rank, 21,000 games played. And let's just jump into it. So this is the first week in a while that a variant of Soldiers wasn't the top deck. We've seen blue-white and mono-white Soldiers kind of duke it out week over week, trying to take that #1 spot. And instead we see mono-black, what are they calling this one? Control, mid-range, mono-black, Invoke. There's kind of 2 variants of mono-black in the format. There's the heavier on 1-drops, more aggression, more 2-drops as well. And then there's this kind of bigger version that's going to Invoke Despair, has some copies of Sorens as well. We've even seen some versions play Corrupt, but those versions kind of fall flat on their face. So the core of this deck's been pretty much unchanged. You have your Evolved Sleepers, Tenacious Underdogs. This version's on 3 Lilianas. You can pitch that, just kind of grind elements. Go for the Throat is largely surpassed Infernal Grasp. There's not too many artifact creatures in the format, at least in best of 1. And this allows you to just not take the damage that Infernal Grasp would cause. Cut Down is your other source of removal, so 8 removal spells with the minus of Liliana as well, paired with Invoke Despair. Bankbuster's card advantage, Evolved Sleeper's card advantage, Invoke Despair's card advantage, Soren's card advantage. This version here, notably as well, is just opting for Field of Ruin, either for the creature lands, the Mishra's Foundry, which we don't see in this particular deck. So Mishra's Foundry is something to hit because Mishra's Foundry is an artifact. So it's the one thing Go for the Throat can't hit. And in the Soldiers decks, in the blue-white Soldiers, you also have the Pump Land. That's the Soldier dual land. And some of these 3-color decks, like Esper, don't play any basics, so you can actually just strip mine them and take away their land. And then you have Takenuma as a utility card. So this version's 66% win rate. We then go to Grixis Mid. And this is a very popular deck in best of 3. Last week when we did it, I think it had like a 75% best of 3 win rate. Just like an absurd amount. The one thing with this deck here, I don't think Duress is necessarily the right call in best of 1. While there are some, we're going to see a good amount of creature-based decks. Like Soldiers doesn't play too many, if any, creatures. I guess with mono red, you could hit burn spells, but most of these aggressive decks dump their hand fairly early or in top deck mode, so I don't love Duress as a late game card. I'd probably just want to play to the board more in terms of cut downs. Abrade's a nice call, just being able to also hit artifacts if they scale up. Just a lot of removal, some counters. It's very similar to that of the mono black deck, but you're getting the addition of Fable the Mirror Breaker. Just a very, very, very powerful card. Does a whole bunch of things in terms of ramping you, shaping your hand, and then just letting you copy. And 2 of the best copies for are Corpse Appraiser that provide you more card advantage through exiling stuff out of your opponent's graveyard, as well as Blood Tithe Harvester, which can be an additional removal spell every turn. The Grixis version's on 4 Swamps, which help to cast the Invoke Despairs. So it's a 3-color deck playing a 4 pip of a mono color. Standard is healthy. We then go to our first sightings of Soldiers, 57% win rate. So this is the blue-white Soldiers list, and something I think is correct that they've done in recent weeks is move to having copies of Myrel. The blue-white versions at times were skipping on Myrel. They were going heavier on like 1-drop, stuff like that. Myrel plays really nice because it doesn't get hit by Brotherhood's End. It's a singular threat that needs to be answered. It shuts off instant speed removal. Just it's an engine. Like if you untap with this card, you usually just overrun the game. Like a lot of the decks I've been playing recently have been playing Brotherhood's End just to deal with a lot of these creature decks. And Myrel is just a card I'm very scared to see. This version here is using Harbins as well as like Resolute Reinforcements to go wide. Harbin kind of provides another Anthem effect, so it's a more conditional Lord effect in a sense, where Valiant Veteran's a static effect. Your soldiers always get the power. Harbin is based on attack, but those attacks are very good, just giving all your team +1/1 and flying. There's not a lot of flyers in the format or reach creatures, so you usually could just win or just put them very far behind, especially if you have something like Myrel. And I think largely this is okay. The only thing I'd maybe consider trimming 1 Thalia for Sky Strike. I've always found this card very impressive. Just being able to grind and stuff in the mirrors goes a long way. And you'll see the Fortified Beachhead is one of those lands I was mentioning, which just provides a lot of utility. Even the Plaza Heroes, low-key, you have a good number of legendary creatures between Harbin, Thalia, and Myrel, just providing indestructible, another, like, you could force 2 removal spells for them to get rid of the Myrel. It goes a long way as well. We then go to Mono White Aggro. This is a newer deck that showed up this week. So it is Mono White, Splash, just a couple colors for the Archangel of Wrath. So it's like a Mono White Life Gain Angels kind of sub-theme. You have Giada that can go into Inspiring Overseer, Archangel of Wrath, or Steel Seraph, all are angels. You have your Hopeful Initiates that grow bigger, Luminarch Veterans, Voice of the Blessed gets bigger as well, Life Gain from Kyla's, tokens, counters, all that jazz. The Double Strike can be used as like a win condition, plays really nice with the Archangel as well to gain you a bunch of life. And then the Wandering Emperor, you have Lauren's Escape as protection, and then Soul Partition. Either you can be used offensively or defensively to kind of reset one of your creatures. We then go to Selesnya Enchantments at 57%. So this is the Nothing's Changed. And every so often this list will come up, and the mana base is always terrible. Whoever is building these lists, just spend a couple wildcards. Full 4 of Overgrown Farmland should be played. Full 4 Brushland should be played. You want to be able to go green on 1 untapped into white-green on turn 2 ideally. And with this mana base, you're going to get times where you get all plains, you're going to get all forests, and it just doesn't work out in that regard there. The core of this deck is just playing enchantments, doubling up Enter the Battlefield or Saga triggers, drawing a bunch of cards, exiling 2 things at a time, and then winning with like a big Kami or Katilda suiting up on any of your creatures. You also have Mashiko that can power up something, ideally something with Trample, or flying as evasion and kill your opponent that way there. We then go to Mono Red Aggro, Mono Red Burn. So this version here, we're seeing inclusions of Jaya. Really quick, Sokuzan should be added to the mana base here. Anytime you're playing a single color deck, just play one of the channel lines. At worst, it's an untapped line that goes for your color. At best, it's, in this case, 2 creatures with haste, or Boseiju, or Ijanjo. Just, there's so much utility in these lines, play them. So this version here is on Mechanized Warfare to pump up the value of your burn spells. You have End the Festivities, which can be used as a one-sided sweeper that scales with the more copies of Mechanized Warfare you have. Reckless Impulse, Jaya, and Chandra are card advantage engines. And then you have stuff like Reinforced Ronin that can keep coming back every turn. Burn in Play with Fire, Lightning Strike, and then just a lot of cheap creatures kind of mixed in with that. The one thing with this deck, it could be effective against these creature mirrors. I've tried versions of these Mechanized Warfare decks. they have a very hard time against Shieldred, as you can imagine. There's the 3 mana deal 5 that kind of sucks outside of Shieldred. You really have to hope for mechanized warfare and scalable damage, or putting your opponent far enough back that they have to make poor blocks, kind of get there. I would potentially go up copies of Jaya. I actually think Jaya is probably a little bit better than Chandra in this particular build, at least in this format. Chandra is good when your opponent can't really attack it, so something like a control deck, something like that. But she doesn't protect herself. And there's a lot of creature-based decks that can easily attack into Chandra. Even the more control-y builds, say something like Mono Black, could have a 3/2 on turn 2. That deals a good chunk of Chandra's damage as well. So just some things to consider. In the best of 3 versions, they've been like 3 copies of Jaya. It makes tokens, gives you card advantage, all that. We've seen Mono White Soldiers be in the 60% win rate in past. It's dropped to 54%. So just getting outscaled by some of the other decks in the format right now. The 8 to 10 removal spells in Mono Black and Grixis kind of preying on it. This version here is at 54%, and very similar to what we see in the blue-white version. However, you're basically playing mono white for cleaner mana and then lay down arms. So you have more interaction in this deck. Arguably weaker. So Guardian of Benalia, it's decent because you could give it indestructible, but in this deck here, you're not really taking advantage of the cards being put into the graveyard. So unlike something where, like we've seen mono white in the past play Sarah Paragon, that lets you recast those things out of the graveyard, the only real graveyard value that you have is something like Yodian Frontliner or Valiant Veteran, and honestly, you'd rather cast Valiant Veteran than just use its ability necessarily. Version's also on copies of Wandering Emperor. The mana base does allow for more additional copies of Mishra's Foundry to be played, but you do lose the pump effect. Now, you can play, and I've played in my Mono White Soldiers at one point, I forget what the line's called, the Fortified Beachhead, because it always comes into play as an untapped white source anyways. It does make your laydown arms a little worse, but I found like the pump kind of offsets it at times. This is a cleaner answer to Shieldred. Brutal Cathar is not very good in terms of as a removal spell traditionally against a deck that has a lot of removal back, because you could either reset their ETBs or stuff like that. And then the last deck, it's not one that's been featured, but I've had a lot of success with. So I went 7-2 in the Decathlon, and then I'm 6-1 on the ladder with it, losing a close one to Soldiers, where I didn't have the answer for Myrel, and it ended up sweeping me up. So it's a Jeskai Portal to Phyrexia. I also was able to get 7 wins in the Alchemy Decathlon with just a ported out version. But this deck here, what you're looking to do is just fill your graveyard. So you have Faithful Mending, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Elder Dragon War. Ideally, what you want to put into play is either to your graveyard 1 with the Multiverse or Portal to Phyrexia, and then you use Repair Recharge to reanimate it as early as turn 4, thanks to Fable the Mirror Breaker tokens. Outside of that, it's really meant to deal with an aggro-based meta. So the thing is, hard control is going to be a terrible matchup. That was one of my losses in the Decathlon event, was to Esper Control. Mono blue tempo can also be a problem, but I haven't really seen much of it on the ladder. We haven't seen it in the stats at all. But Sunset Revelry, very good against all these creature-based decks. You'll notice a lot of them are X1 in terms of toughness, so it's an easier way to deal with stuff like that. Brotherhood's End can either deal with the artifacts or the creatures. Very scalable in that sense. Also deals with opponent's planeswalkers. Wandering Emperor's catch-all removal in terms of exile. The Fairy was an addition because I wanted some card draw engine into it, and then Farewell is another sweeper. The Elder Dragon War can also be used as a sweeper, which works nicely against some of these lower to the ground creature decks. And then again, something like Mono Black, they have no way of getting the portal off the battlefield. They generally don't flood the board either. Liliana is quite troublesome for the deck. I've run into that. Like a Liliana on your opponent on the play, turn 3 Liliana, can be a bit cumbersome to deal with. The Sanctuary Warden was better than Cityscape Reveler because it also provided card advantage. So that's pretty much it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing. I'll link all these in the video description, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.